June 2nd, 1899. A bridge in Wilcox, Wyoming explodes in the dark. The number one Overland Limited grinds to a stop on the tracks, and before anyone on board fully understands what's happening, armed men are moving through the cars. By morning, $30,000 is gone. The newspapers called it daring. The dime novels called it romantic. The Pinkerton agency's case files called it something else entirely. A coordinated strike by a disciplined criminal organization that had been planning this for months. Robert Leroy Parker, born 1866 in Utah, didn't become Butch Cassidy in any meaningful cultural sense until long after the guns went quiet. The version most people carry around, the grinning Paul Newman version, the guy who never shot anyone and just wanted to ride horses and outsmart stuffed shirt railroad executives. That version was built in 1969 by screenwriter William Goldman, and it's been running on fumes ever since. Goldman's film wasn't history. It was a buddy comedy set against a Western backdrop, and it worked so well that it retroactively rewrote the public's understanding of who Cassidy was. But the mythology didn't start with Hollywood. It started in the 1890s in the press rooms of papers like the Denver Post and the Salt Lake Tribune, where editors understood one thing clearly: a charming outlaw sold more copies than a dangerous one. Coverage from that era consistently softened the Wild Bunch's operations, describing robberies as clean and bloodless, even when the evidence on the ground suggested otherwise. That framing served the papers, and it also, not coincidentally, served Cassidy's operation, because a public that saw you as a folk hero was less likely to turn you in. If you're finding this interesting, hit the like button and let us know in the comments. The never killed a man legend attached itself to Cassidy early and never let go. Cassidy himself may have avoided pulling a trigger on a person, and there's no verified record that directly contradicts that. But the Wild Bunch as an organization ran on the credible threat of lethal force. Members of the gang were responsible for deaths. Pauses were shot at. Railroad guards were pistol whipped. A gang whose robberies went smoothly because everyone in the express car believed these men would kill them isn't a gentle operation just because the leader kept his gun holstered. The Pinkerton agency's internal files make this plain in a way that newspaper archives don't. Where the press wrote theater, the Pinkertons wrote operational intelligence. Their wanted circulars and surveillance dispatches, many of which survive in the Library of Congress and in archived Union Pacific records, describe the Wild Bunch with the kind of clinical specificity you'd expect from a military report. Known associates, physical descriptions, probable routes, safe house locations. The picture they assembled wasn't a ragtag band of frontier rebels. It was a rotating criminal network with real infrastructure. Across Wyoming and Utah, a string of ranches operated as what you'd now call logistics hubs, places where gang members could rest, resupply, swap horses, and wait out pursuit. The hole-in-the-wall country in Johnson County, Wyoming was the most well-known of these, but Pinkerton files document others. These weren't hideouts in the cinematic sense. They were functional nodes in a criminal supply chain, and maintaining them cost money, which is exactly why the robberies kept happening. And here's what the railroads didn't want anyone doing the math on. Union Pacific's losses across Wild Bunch operations weren't a rounding error. Estimates from internal company correspondence and Pinkerton billing records put the total damage across multiple robberies well into the hundreds of thousands of dollars. When you factor in lost shipments, security costs, and the retainer fees, they eventually paid the Pinkertons to fix a problem they'd let fester too long. Admitting that a small gang from Wyoming had repeatedly walked through their security like it wasn't there would have rattled investor confidence. So the official line stayed quiet and the myth stayed loud. Strip away the film stock and the newspaper ink, and what's left is a business problem that the railroad industry couldn't solve cheaply. 3 specific robberies prove exactly how bad it got. The Wilcox robbery already appeared in the cold open, but what the newspapers left out is worth examining closely. The gang didn't just stop the train and crack a safe, they blew the Wilcox Bridge in 2 separate charges. The first to stop the train, the second after a relief locomotive arrived, and they needed to stop that too, which means they came to the site carrying enough explosives for at least 2 distinct demolition operations, placed and timed without a misfire. That's not something you figured out the night before. Black powder in those quantities had to be sourced, transported, and packed correctly, and using too little meant the bridge stayed up while using too much meant killing the very train crew you needed compliant and cooperative. They got the balance right twice in the same night. Then they turned the same material on the express car. They packed so much explosion against it that they essentially disintegrated it. Witnesses at the scene described cattle carcasses thrown across the tracks from the force of the blast, and one account put a section of the car's wall 30 feet from where the train sat. The safe inside survived the first charge, so they set a second, which peeled the car apart and left debris scattered across the surrounding ground. Pinkerton reports flagged the operation as requiring advanced scouting, familiarity with Union Pacific's train schedule, knowledge of the bridge's load-bearing structure, and access to materials that weren't sold at a general store. This wasn't improvised. Someone had done homework, and the homework took time. 14 months later, the gang came back for Union Pacific again. The Tipton robbery, August 1900, same railroad, same stretch of Wyoming territory, same basic outcome. What changed was the method, and the method is what the Pinkertons found alarming. At Wilcox, the gang had stopped the train from outside. At Tipton, at least one member boarded as a paying passenger, rode the train, and pulled the emergency signal cord from inside the car when the moment was right. The crew had no warning. By the time they understood what was happening, armed men were already at the express car door. Pinkerton operative reports noted this as a deliberate adaptation, evidence that whoever was running the operation had studied the failure points of Wilcox and adjusted. Union Pacific had had 14 months to fix their security, and they hadn't. The gang noticed. The robbery that gets the least attention is the one that does the most damage to clean mythology. The Folsom robbery, July 1899, New Mexico territory, didn't involve Cassidy directly, but it involved his network, and it ended with 2 men dead. Sheriff Edward Farr and a posse deputy named Henry Love were killed in a running gunfight after the gang hit a Colorado and Southern train near Folsom. The pursuit stretched across 3 states. Pinkerton files from the aftermath show operatives coordinating across New Mexico, Colorado, and Texas, which tells you something about both the gang's mobility and the pressure the agencies were now willing to apply. The nobody got hurt version of the Wild Bunch story doesn't survive contact with Folsom. Taken together, these 3 robberies sketch out an economic logic that had nothing to do with Robin Hood fantasies. Pinkerton correspondence references money from these operations flowing toward land purchases, horse trading, and what the files describe as payments to local law enforcement in certain Wyoming and Utah counties who were willing to not look too hard at certain ranches. The gang was financing itself, and the financing had a structure. Local sheriffs across the region were often outgunned, working with minimal budgets, and in some cases actively compromised. The Pinkertons weren't stepping in because justice demanded it. They were stepping in because Union Pacific was paying them to, and after Tipton, the railroad put them on a permanent retainer. One of the operational byproducts of that contract was a systematic push to distribute photographic wanted posters, an early and deliberate use of photography as a law enforcement tool in the American West. The same railroads being robbed stayed quiet about their losses, and the same papers running sensational headlines handed Cassidy a celebrity that made him harder to catch. Both institutions had reasons to keep the myth alive, and both did. The Wild Bunch found every crack in the post-Civil War economic expansion and walked straight through it. If that kind of institutional failure interests you, subscribe and check out the next video below.